Hey everyone, here's a short video about the great Gene Krupa, one of my favorite drummers and biggest influences, and the reason I became a jazz drummer in the first place. And he not only was a great drummer, but from reading interviews with him and from knowing a bunch of people who knew him, it seems like he was also a pretty cool guy. So here are 5 things that I think all drummers can learn from Gene Krupa, even if you're not really a fan of his, even if you're into a completely different style of music. I think these are 5 good lessons for all of us. Okay, so number 1, never stop learning. Gene Krupa was completely dedicated to the drums, and he never stopped practicing and taking lessons and trying to improve. His entire life, he was always studying. He would study sometimes with people even much younger than him, like Jim Chapin. He was always working on his technique, his command of the instrument. He studied different styles of music. He studied African drumming. He studied bebop. He was just very curious. And he was someone who obviously he could have just rested on his laurels with everything that he accomplished and how influential he was. He didn't need to do any of this, yet he wanted to improve. He always wanted to learn more, and I think that's a beautiful thing and very inspiring. And if Gene Krupa, as great as he was, never stopped practicing and taking lessons and trying to improve, why would we be any different? So I think that's a great lesson. Number 2, focus on getting a good sound. This is something I think that sometimes drummers can overlook. If you're playing a trumpet or a saxophone, obviously getting a good sound and getting a good tone, that's going to be a key thing that you're focused on. But sometimes with drummers, we can be so wrapped up with our technique and independence and learning different grooves and working on our time. Sometimes we can forget about getting a good sound, but that's really important. It can even sometimes be more important with the drums, because the drums can be a very abrasive sounding instrument if you're not careful. And Gene Krupa was very aware of getting a good sound. He would sometimes have other people play his drums while he stood out front and listened, because drums sound different when you're sitting behind them. And he always, his entire life, he always got a beautiful, full, warm sound. And some of that had to do with the drums and cymbals that he chose to play, but most of it had to do with the attention he put into tuning them, and also with his touch. He had a great touch, and that's the main thing that's going to get a good sound out of the instrument. So don't neglect sound. It's as important, I would say, as any other aspect of drumming. Okay, now we're going to get a little more philosophical perhaps and personal. Number 3 is don't be an egomaniac. I've always been struck reading interviews with Gene Krupa how he didn't just talk about himself. He always would talk about other drummers who influenced him. He would talk about Baby Dodds and Zutty Singleton and Chick Webb and George Wettling and Dave Tuff. Some of these players were a bit older than him, some were around his own age, but he would always go out of his way to bring attention to these other drummers, all of whom were far less well known to the general public than he was. And again, he's someone with all his fame and accomplishments, he easily could have just talked about himself and never mentioned any of these other players. And the fact that he would talk so much about these other drummers, I think it's a real beautiful thing. To me, that shows that he was secure with himself. And I think, especially in this day and age with social media, it's very easy to let our egos get out of control and just try to brag about what we're doing. And it's a really great thing, I think, to see how Gene Krupa didn't do that. And again, if he didn't do that with everything he accomplished, why would we do that? Just something to think about. Number 4 is kind of related to that. Don't put down other drummers or other styles of music. Gene Krupa, again, in interviews, he's always so open-minded and positive and diplomatic. In some interviews, you can tell the interviewer is really baiting him, trying to get him to say something bad about younger drummers, about bebop drummers or rock drummers, and he doesn't do it. He had a really positive attitude, and I think that's great. There's so much negativity around. It's really a breath of fresh air when you hear someone like that speak. And again, that to me shows true confidence. Nothing comes across more insecure than just trash talking people. So I think it's good to remember that if Gene Krupa, again, with as great as he was, everything he did, if he didn't feel the need to put down other players or other styles of music, maybe we shouldn't either. Again, just something to think about. And then finally, number 5, play from the heart. As studious as Gene Krupa was, his playing never sounds academic. It certainly never sounds like he's phoning it in. He gives 100% all the time, and he just had a great feeling and emotion to his playing. And what's the point of music? What's the point of drumming without that? If there's not going to be any feeling there, even if it's all technically correct, even if the time is even, if there's no feeling there, it's not really going to be inspiring to anyone. It might as well be a machine. So that's a great lesson to get from Gene Krupa, just the emotion that he put into it and the feeling in his playing. You know, regardless of what style you're playing, I think you want some feeling there. So there you go. I hope this was fun. I don't necessarily mean this to even be taken that seriously, but I do think these are 5 great lessons and certainly things that have been inspiring for me and that I try to keep in mind. So hopefully some of you will be inspired by Gene Krupa in these ways. Hopefully it'll give you something to think about. Hopefully this was fun. So thank you for watching, everyone. I will be back soon.